Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwn.com. And Greg, interest rates are expected lower for the first time since COVID. That means there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. It's going to help you navigate the choppy times with a solid plan. And I expect Nick to be 12-0 this fall. Greg, it is game week. Nice to see you.
It's game week, but I'm puzzled, Steve. That didn't sound like Carl in our intro. Have I lost my mind?
You have not lost your mind. Unfortunately, Carl Grapentine can't announce the game from his seat that he has been at for so many years and decades.
Why is that? Carl Grapentine, the guy who does our intro so amazingly, his daughter is getting married out of town. It was scheduled way ahead before they aligned the schedule with the football season. And of course, Carl will be at his daughter's wedding. He is forgiven, but that was the voice of Jason Morris, the guy who is going to sit in that chair for just one game. He also is the voice of Michigan hockey in the arena and calls for those of you local Chelsea, Michigan football games. So that was really cool to Jason. We thought we'd throw that in there.
This sounds like my family. Not having things checked with me beforehand and done. They assume that there is no football in August, but August 31st is close enough.
It does bring up a question, though, Steve, that people bring up this time of year, is this whole topic of fall weddings. In your mind, is that a taboo? Is that a no-no? Where do you stand on this? Because people have very strong opinions on whether you should have fall weddings.
My wife does this to me all the time. She wanted a fall wedding, so guess what? We had a fall wedding. I mean, this does not happen with Reese Davis's family. This does not happen with Kirk Herbstreit's family, where Kirk's not at a game because, his wife scheduled something and they'll be out of town, or his daughter scheduled a wedding. These things do not happen. I mean, I'm not at that level. We all understand that, but they just ignore it. I'm easily replaceable.
Yes, I have an anniversary coming up in a month. Therefore, my wife wanted to do the same thing, Steve. And in the way I see it, if that's what someone strongly feels about, especially a wife, just go with it, okay?
Yeah.
You know, we spend so much time in these football games. Can they have this day and then this anniversary? Give it to them. So I do not have this hard, fast rule that you can't do these things. Yes, I'd prefer these weekends be avoided if possible. But I don't have that. What are you doing? You can never do that. No, I don't think that's fair.
I'm missing out on the Washington game. I'm going to be out of the country. But that's the way it goes.
All right. We will be on the radio station this week, Steve, on another fantastic Friday. We'll be in studio from 1 to 3 p.m. coming up this Friday.
Correct. So this has become almost an annual tradition for us, even before the Professor and the Pundit started. Of course, if you can't get enough of the Professor and the Pundit, you can listen on WTKA 1050.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. What else? A quick heads up for those of you in town, September 26th, I'm going to be doing a talk, a full-length lecture, actually, Steve. It's going to be like an hour at the observatory on campus in Ann Arbor. It's going to cover early college football, and then we're going to dovetail into the Little Brown Jug because that's the Thursday before the Minnesota game. I'll have more on that and links. It's actually going to be live streamed as well.
Oh, sign me up.
Yeah, so for those of you out of town, we'll share that info. And then, Steve, as we mentioned, you've got the countdown to kickoff coming up Saturday.
That's right. I wonder, it hasn't been talked about. We haven't had a meeting yet. I wonder if we're going to be doing predictions anymore. Because I think Sam, after the last game, when he lost again,
Steve's being modest.
He said that
Steve has put the hammer down. How many years in a row on these guys in predictions?
A long time. And then Sam, I think, figuratively threw in the towel after the last one. He said, "We're not doing this anymore." And so I haven't heard back, and I haven't asked since. But that's usually one of our fun segments is to go over all the games
it's
and
fun
have
for
a good
you.
prediction. Well, it's great for me.
Now, is the problem Sam tends to go with his heart too much and you go with your head, or are you just better at this, Steve, because you're the pundit?
Pundits.
Or is it a little of both?
Both.
Okay.
I'm not going to deny it. I'm smarter. No.
All right. And you'll also get to hear This Week in Michigan Football History. You might remember a guy named Phil Brabs, because that fell on August 31st. I believe the year was 2002.
Yes.
And this is the anniversary of that great kick. So we're going to have some fun with that.
What a fantastic game that was. But it was down to the wire, and there was a bunch of plays that could have gone either way that led up to that kick as well. So that's probably a classic for a lot of people.
We cover a lot. I mean, there were odd, like, fumbles that saved us. There was a very, very harsh penalty right at the end of the game. Otherwise, we probably would have been out of luck. I mean, Neuheisel at the end of the game said that the mistake they made, they had 12 men on the field, that put Michigan in field goal position. He said it would haunt the Husky program for 1,000 years, which seems a little strong.
Should have asked him about that when I met him last year.
This is hail to the conquering heroes right here. This was an impressive win.
So yes, we saw Coach Neuheisel on the bus. You saw him going to the game.
I was on the bus going with him, I think, to the Rose Bowl.
Yes.
Was on the bus with him on the way back from Houston.
Okay, and I went back to the hotel with him from the Rose Bowl to the hotel, believe it or not. So we had Coach covered.
We left him alone.
We did, pretty much. Some Michigan news, Steve. The captains were announced, which, of course, is in and of itself a major Michigan tradition. They've kind of gotten into this pocket where they're trying to elect 2 offensive captains and 2 defensive captains. What did you take away here from this announcement?
Well, let's name them. First of all, you got Rod Moore, who was injured for the season. Clearly, Rod had a big input in Michigan making it to the Big Ten championship game with that final minute interception on Kyle McCord. So he will always be legendary for that. But apparently he has such great influence on the rest of the team that he isn't left the team. He is still with the team in spirit and in body.
It says all you need to know. We've had injured captains before, but typically they're injured during the season. Who else, Steve?
Makari Page, great in coverage. And he's going to be one of those safeties that Michigan's going to need to count on to be able to continue to have that great defense against aerial attacks. As more and more offenses start going into aerial attacks, that secondary gets more and more important all the time. But Makari Page is going to be, pardon the pun, a page-turner for the Wolverines, and I expect great things out of him.
All right, and then we had a former walk-on in Max Bredesen be named captain.
And he joins his brother Ben in his footsteps as a captain as well. Now, Ben was a 2-time captain at Michigan, but Max joining him, part of the family there. And he's an H-back guy. You're going to see him in multiple tight end sets. And Bredesen is a guy who is a tough guy amongst a team full of tough guys. And I think it's a well-deserved honor, and I think it's a message center.
Yep, and then we had Donovan Edwards, which is good to see. You knew he was going to be a leader as far as where this team is going to go, a lot of it through Donovan Edwards. And really, I think that's a good sign because he's acknowledged some problems with his attitude, with how he felt his place was in the offense, that he's acknowledged. And for the team to vote him captain says a lot.
Donovan Edwards has a chance to be the Doak Walker Award winner. There are several viable candidates for that, and there's a lot of great running backs in the Big Ten this year. You know, not only from Ohio State, but at Penn State and at Oregon. But there's some individual national award winners that are possible with this Michigan football team. And so what do you think about Will Johnson potentially winning the Thorpe Award as the best defensive back, either Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant for the Best Interior Lineman Award, which is known as the Outland, or Colston Loveland as the best tight end in the nation as the Mackey? What do you think?
I think Will Johnson has a great shot if teams throw the ball his way, and he gets some numbers to back it up where he gets that national attention. That's the limiting factor on a lot of cornerbacks because are they going to put him on an island and just go the other direction? So he'll get some tackles, he'll do this and that.
Well, that's a great point because when people are voting on this, some of them just look at numbers. They say, oh, boy, he led the team in tackles. He must be great. Are they that ill-informed?
I led our team in high school in one game in tackles. I was a DB. My coach said, that's not a good thing, Dooley. Because the guy in front of me caught the ball, then I tackled him quite a few times. He's like, yeah, they're catching the ball, they're getting first downs, you're making tackles. That's not good.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
So a lot of times when somebody leads the team in passes broken up, it's because they're being targeted all the time. They're considered the weak side. That's where we're going to throw our passes to. And the law of averages and numbers suggests that passes are going to be broken up. Sometimes that indicates weakness, not a strength. So Will Johnson, depending on how people vote, and of course, Ohio State's Caleb Downs thinks he's the best player in the nation in the secondary. But there's a lot of people thinking right off the bat that, Will Johnson could actually be the number one pick in the 2025 NFL draft. And I'm not speaking hyperbole there or just being a Michigan fan. That's what I'm hearing. And usually you don't take corners with the first pick in the NFL draft. That's usually a rule.
And if you base it
could happen.
If you base it on EA, the new college football game, he is the most talented player, apparently. So what else? You mentioned Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. So technically they're both vying for the Outland Trophy. Most people, argue they are amongst the best in the country. What do you think? Do you think they have a possibility there?
I do. When you look again at where these guys are going to be drafted, that Graham and Grant could be selected both in the top 10, along with Will Johnson. You could factor that maybe one or two of them will be a factor in that. Now, they're going to have to show that they can get into the backfield a lot, that the running games from opposing teams are going to be shut down, and quite frankly, the strength of most of the Big Ten team contenders are in the running game. A lot of people coming into this season see Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham as high first-round picks, and that might sort of persuade them, prejudge their way into winning that award, regardless of how they do on the field.
Yeah, there's absolutely a bias there, and all of these guys, one thing's for sure, they're all going to get a lot of eyeballs from the nation, right? Because we have so many high-profile games, starting with Texas, and then that USC game right around the corner, so that's going to be a big deal.
And then Colston Loveland.
Yes, and again, kind of like in the same argument with Will Johnson, is he going to get attention? He is, but also he'll split out all the way. It won't just be the traditional tight end route just coming off the line of scrimmage. He'll get a lot of attention this year. And in fact, I think we're going to throw a lot of short passes this year. And I think Donald's going to get some action. I think all our tight ends are going to get a lot of action, but especially Loveland. So I think he has a great shot to win.
I think Colston Loveland, out of all the names that I mentioned, is probably the most likely national award winner based on not only his reputation, but what you expect to see out of this Michigan offense. I think he has the best chance of winning one of those national awards.
Yep. In fact, ESPN's preseason show, they indeed picked Mr. Loveland for the Mackey Award, so we'll see. Obviously, all these guys need to stay healthy, and they'll be exciting to watch. All right, Steve, what else, man?
So a lot of talk during the offseason, ever since spring ball, Greg, is position groups. And Michigan lost a lot of players on offense, including quarterback, offensive line, top two receivers, moving on. Defenses has some holes to fill in there. What position groups do you have the most confidence in going into 2024, and what position group are you the most unsure of?
Okay, I guess I'll start with most confidence. And if tight end is a position group, I feel great about it. We already talked about Loveland. We haven't talked about Marlon Klein, who kind of came on at the end of the year, and I think he only has one career reception. I have a hunch he's going to get the ball a lot this year, and he's got great size. He's going to be fantastic. I also am very optimistic that Donovan Edwards is going to be a very, very powerful, effective runner this year, and Khalil Mullins is going to be there in the backfield pounding away. I think you're going to see some high production out of that for a unit, being the offense, that most people have the biggest questions about. What about you, man?
For me, what I'm most confident in is the defensive line from top to bottom. Interior tackles, we already talked about them. The edge rushers, I think, are going to be fantastic. Well, that is who I have the most confidence in. What I have the least confidence in right now is quarterback. And a lot of that has to do with none of us seeing the quarterbacks play against other opponents, except for the open spring scrimmage. And it's extremely rare and difficult to win a conference championship and playoff games with just average quarterback play, although the Buckeyes will try to prove me wrong there. And we're hoping that Alex Orji, if he is the starter, and we still think that he is, we hope that he can grow into being Jalen Milroe by the end of the year. But I think that was a very, very big leap that Jalen Milroe, to his credit, took from being benched in Game 3 to leading Alabama to a conference championship in the SEC. That's a lot to ask out of Alex Orji for his skill set, and I know that his skill set is getting better at passing the ball, but that is the position group that I am most concerned about.
Yeah, and if your goal is the playoff, or if you're a fan and you're like, well, the playoff is how I'm going to measure this season, it's nice that we've got the 12-game playoff, as we've talked about. There may be some time for him to grow. right, in these early games because we're going to get some big opponents in here, so we'll see. You didn't put this in here, Steve, but the guy I'm rooting for the most, like as a fan, Samaj Morgan.
Why is that?
I've had quite a few of these guys, and I don't talk about it very much in my class, but I got to know Samaj's dad at the Champion Circle golf outing and just know Samaj a little more just from being around. I just love his attitude, his style. If you've heard him interview with Sam Webb, I mean, they broke the mold when they made this kid, and it's just infectious to me. I just think he's wonderful. I just want to see him have a big season. And I believe he's switching to the number 0, right? So he'll be the number 0 out there, which I think is great too. So anyway, I'm rooting for Samaj. So I remember last year, it's funny, I was thinking about this. I was so worried about, because Jake Moody was gone, right? I was so worried about the kicking game. So James Turner did a great job last year. But somehow I feel like in 15 games, there never was quite that we got to have this one moment. Maybe I'm forgetting. But that seems surprising to me looking back, that nothing really super strong came down to the kicking game for us, right?
Well, one of the things is the Michigan offense went for it on 4th down quite a bit. And
That's
it was
true.
4th and manageable. And when you have Blake Corum and you have Joe Moore award-winning line, you're just going to continue to go for it. I think there could become a bit of a concern that if they go for it on 4th down as much, what happens when they come out empty? These are just hypotheticals, but there was not much of a reliance on the kicking game to settle for 3 because Michigan wasn't settling for 3.
Yep. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. But he generally did a great job with the kicks. It just wasn't a super high-pressure situation that we usually see a few times during the year. I don't think we're going to be so lucky this year. I'm sure we'll have some tighter games this year than we had. We'll have some very, very clutch moments, and we'll need to be able to convert. But we got a game coming up, man. Saturday night, under the lights. And I think most people are probably overlooking the opponent. I don't know if the opening spread's been put out there yet, Steve, on this one.
It is about 21.5 as of right now.
Okay. I was thinking a little lower than that. But tell me, what should we be concerned about? Because this is a respectable team coming in here.
Yeah, their offense is really good. They return a lot of people. Quarterback Mikey Keene and running back Malik Sherrod were both considered first-team preseason Mountain West Conference selections. There's 12 teams in that conference, and they said, Mikey Keene, you're the best quarterback in this conference. And Malik Sherrod, you're one of the 2 best running backs in this conference. Sherrod could have had over 1,000 yards last year, but missed a couple of games. How about this one? I grabbed this one from ESPN's Bill Connolly. He says that only 2 players in college football last year had 600 snaps, 0 penalties, and a blown run block rate of 1% or lower.
Okay, so played a ton.
Yep.
Was not penalized.
Ever.
And was wildly efficient in their blocking,
Right.
in their assignment.
Right.
There's two players.
Zach Zinner from Michigan and Fresno State's Mose Vavalo, who will be coming into the big house. He returns for another year. Just those 2 players.
Wow.
So that's some good company, right?
That's why you're the pundit, man.
Yeah, so Michigan will have easier games in conference play than they will against Fresno State. If Fresno State was in the Big Ten, they'd probably be 10th or 11th. They're a contender to win the conference along with Boise State. And folks, this is not going to be East Carolina. This is not going to be Bowling Green or UNLV or some of those teams that Michigan faced over the last few years in September. This is like playing another conference game against an average Big Ten team.
Okay. And a 3-touchdown favorite. Probably a lot of money on Michigan, but respectable. Probably, knock on wood, Steve, kind of what you want in your opener is my guess, with a new coach, a new quarterback.
I like that considering they're playing Texas the next week.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't want to be playing Delaware State and, beat them 70-0. And then the next week, Texas comes in.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want the listening audience to feel worried about it, but Michigan fans have seen worse for a home opener.
Steve, we haven't. Yes, we have. We haven't lost a home game, correct me if I'm wrong, in 4 years?
Since 2020.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. Wow. All right, but the college football season kicked off officially with week 0 this Saturday. Game day was in Dublin, Ireland, for the Georgia Tech Florida State game. It was quite a scene. It was mostly Florida State fans who you probably know were heavily disappointed because there was a 44-yard field goal at the end Georgia Tech made to beat Florida State. But I watched most of game day, Steve. I think you were tied up. And Florida State fans, Steve, do not forget what Herbstreit said about their team in the wake of the announcement for the college football playoff. Herbstreit was one of the most vocal people saying Florida State should not be in. Alabama or someone else should be in the playoff.
Because they were asking his opinion every
Yes.
5 seconds.
Well, the Florida State fans in Dublin,
Yep.
probably a little pickled.
I understand.
Maybe a few Guinness and Jamesons to wash it down. Relentlessly booed Herbstreit in the beginning. as you would
College
expect.
football fans with a grudge?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Right.
Trying to picture this in my mind.
So a few game day signs that I can't repeat here about what Herbstreit did to them. Okay.
The signs weren't blurred out.
Well, they flashed a few, and some of them made it to Twitter.
If you can draw a yellow line and a blue line and kind of make it move at will, I mean, you could figure you can kind of blur out a moving sign.
You probably could. But I'll tell you, one thing they did, it's a 3-hour show? They incessantly booed him every time he spoke about anything, about any topic, okay? And I got to say, I felt bad for Herbstreit in the end. I like
bad for a
Herbstreit.
Buckeye.
I felt bad for a Buckeye, and I'll say it, I think Herbstreit does a great job in that show. I think he speaks his mind. I don't think he's biased. I think he does a wonderful job, not only in college football when he calls the games, but I think he does a great job on Thursday night with the NFL. I felt bad for him. In fact, I was kind of rooting against Florida State. I found myself rooting against Florida State because of their fans were so obnoxious, and was happy that ball sailed through, Steve. No time left.
Welcome to Ann Arbor. People hating Michigan because they don't like their fan base. I've heard that before.
Yeah, no, it was something. So the other thing they did on game day was they talked about the 12-team bet bracket. They put a little video together to explain how the 12-team bracket is going to work. I think Professor and Pundit fans know that, but we'll talk about that some other time. What they did was they showed last year's how it would have played out in a bracket. Had last year been a playoff, which was fun, and they showed a couple scenarios for the last 2 years. I thought it was funny that they had Ohio State and Penn State playing each other in the first round. That's how that would have fell, right? So you'll see things like that in the future. But Herbstreit has Michigan in the playoff, and so does Pat McAfee. Okay.
Now the latter surprises me. Because
Yeah.
Pat McAfee picked against Michigan just about every game after midway through the season. Picked Washington, picked Alabama, picked Ohio State, picked Iowa, picked Penn State.
Yeah. Their narrative is everyone's overlooking Michigan. How can you ignore the team? They just won the national championship. It's really about their culture and locker room. Like everyone's saying that. They're saying it. Herbstreit had Michigan as an 11th seed, so just barely getting in.
And be the last at-large team.
Playing at Texas, Steve, in his hypothetical playoff. They all liked Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon as really the top teams, with Georgia and Oregon as the most common teams to make it to the finals, to the championship game. Yep.
Now, to me, it's been clear with about everybody that I've read, watched, and seen, there is 4 teams. We could have had a 14 playoff. There's 4 teams that everybody sees as at one very high level. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas. And Michigan happens to play 3 of those 4 teams. Just happens to do that.
Yeah.
So, in a way, Michigan is already sort of in the playoff. They're going to be playing 2 of those 3 playoff games at home. So they have a chance to earn it. And I think if Michigan wins one of those games against the top 5, they'll be in a good position. Maybe even a better position than Penn State.
Yep. The roster's in shape, Steve. We talk more and more about NIL. In fact, we mentioned Ohio State. One of either their president or athletic director basically said this is a $20 million roster. And if someone's saying it's a $20 million roster for Ohio State, it's probably more like 30. They are spending a lot of money. That's clear. That's public. Michigan's doing a lot better, though. From what I hear, we're in the double digits of the millions, so 10, 12, $13 million in money committed this year, which is a big improvement, believe it or not, over last year. And of course, we made these 2 hires. First of all, Tracy Whitehead is the overarching new role at Michigan, general manager. She works for a third-party company, Altius. And the football team hired back Sean McGee. He was working for the Chicago Bears. also from the NFL, of course, because that's the world we live in, Steve, is that it's about managing rosters, money, carving out opportunities out of existing contracts and deals and new advertising deals for the players to take part in. We're going to have to figure out how the revenue sharing fits in. One cool thing that we're going to do this year in my NIL class is we're actually talking about a partnership with our friends from Underground Printing who made our Professor and the Pundit, our new Professor and the Pundit shirts are sweet. They made them and Champion Circle and potentially some actual U of M athletes to actually make gear and stuff for them as we progress through the class and work with them. So that'll be fun. So stay tuned for that.
One of the things I'm keeping my eyes on is the number of players who verbally commit well before signing day about where they're going to go. And then it gives a fresh opportunity for another school to say, well, this person verbally committed here. I guess we're going to have to up the ante if we want that person to decommit and come our way. And I think you see that happening quite a bit.
As you're saying, like a price is set, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think somebody says, look, would love to be at your school, but you're not offering as much, and therefore my verbal commitment is now here. I pick the hat. Everybody celebrates. Fan sites rejoice in the glorious, another recruiting victory, only to find them 2 weeks later decommitting and going somewhere else. Everybody's changed their minds throughout history, long before NIL. But I think what I'm paying attention to is how often people are going to change their mind. And how often is that reason because somebody decided to give somebody a more serious offer?
That's the world we live in. It's the frustration of a lot of coaches. Say what you want about Saban and whether you believe him or not, but it was that kind of thing that was driving them nuts that led him to that stage. In fact, he's on game day now.
He's on a different stage.
Making predictions.
He's on a different stage.
Also getting booed.
Is Nick Saban going to wear headgear someday? I mean, when Lee Corso is finally done, is Nick Saban going to be the one wearing headgear and blowing a horn? Shooting a gun, a rifle.
Yes.
Is Nick Saban going to be that guy?
I just can't see it. I cannot see it. He did muster a smile a couple times and make a couple one-liners, but
is Nick Saban coachable for today's media environment?
I don't know. He did a pretty good job. He did begrudgingly say, I spent, all these years banging on you guys for making predictions about stuff you don't know about and things like this and that. And he goes, now I got to do it on TV. He's like, so.
But it's okay because I do know it all.
Right.
That's how he justifies it to himself.
Okay, y'all ready for a lecture?
Well, never forget. And I'll never forget, the first thing I think when I see Nick Saban now is, of course, thinking of the Rose Bowl. And you guys all know how that worked out for Coach Nick.
One last thing on Saban. Kalen DeBoer took out all of Saban's furniture and completely modernized it. And I would figure for a guy who's still at Alabama quite a bit, there would have been a little bit more grace. But DeBoer said something like, it looked like I was at my great aunt's or my great grandma's house, and this all had to go.
It had.
And Greg, a lot of important things happened in that room over the years. When it's all said and done, I think you still kind of want Nick to be on your side when you're the first-year head coach for the Tide.
It was like leather-bound books and rich mahogany, Steve. It was very much like a cigar lounge, kind of feel. I remember I've seen some pictures of him.
The wood wasn't cherry, it was oak.
Yeah,
okay?
it
was stained oak from the 1970s.
Yeah, and that's his vibe, and we get that. So I don't blame Coach DeBoer for doing that. All right, Steve, do we need to head in the locker room?
We do.
All right.
It's halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And now joining us in studio to talk a little bit about football and investing is Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner for Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Nick, one of these days, Michigan may have to come from behind and go into the hurry-up offense. And that also kind of reminds me of something that I learned a few years ago, that once you get to a certain age, you can actually donate more to your 401k and self-IRAs. It's called the catch-up program after the age of 50.
That's right. The catch-up contribution for this year, for 23, the amount is $30,000 if you're over age 50 into your 401. So it's meaningful. It's like an extra $7,500. Like in 2003 at Minnesota, right? Lloyd calls the hurry up offense in the third quarter right? That's the only way you can come back. You got to take advantage of the catch-up.
So does that apply to the HSA too? Do they have a catch-up?
They do. It's only $1,000 extra, but they do have that.
It's righteous bucks.
So if you want to get a hold of Nick and ask him any questions, or you just want to ask for a couple of ideas, go to peakwm.com. That's peakwm.com. And again, thanks to Nick. He helps make this podcast possible. For every one of you that enjoys listening to this podcast, thank Nick privately or give Nick a call or look at his website at peakwm.com.
Steve, apparently we had a few people hang on and listen to our breakdown of the proposed House settlement, how it's going to affect revenue sharing, rosters, all that stuff. We got some reaction. In fact, one of my favorites, David, a.k.a. Mgo Shu, he wrote, I don't understand how a varsity sports program can be sustained without a full complement of scholarships. Then, when certain schools drop a sport, it may put in jeopardy the Big Ten's ability to organize a conference slate or schedule, which may cause dominoes to fall. Net, he says, if the Big Ten doesn't intervene here, we're heading for utter chaos. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so my first thought is that we're already been into that situation. Many of the Michigan sports don't have a full complement of scholarships. When certain schools either drop a sport, it puts in jeopardy the Big Ten's ability to organize a conference slate. I'm reading the same thing you did.
Yeah.
We have that with hockey. Not every Big Ten team fields a hockey team. And we have teams that are not in the Big Ten in Big Ten hockey, like Notre Dame. And then was it lacrosse? You told me that Johns Hopkins is a part of men's lacrosse.
Yeah, they have been. I don't know if that changed I'll have to see if that's still a thing. But they have an affiliate relationship in our league.
So some of these things are kind of already happening. And in terms of the scholarships, baseball isn't full, gymnastics isn't full. There's just going to be a shuffling, I think, just a little bit. It allows you the opportunity under this new deal to fully fund every single team, but nobody was fulling every single team to begin with. And one more thing I want to add, the Big Ten each and every year is going to have more money than everybody else. It's the other conferences that are going to suffer first well before a Big Ten membership school does.
Okay, so I see his point, and the only difference I'd say, Steve, is you're right. Some of this stuff is happening. If it is approved, will affect every single sport all at once and change the way they operate. And right now, Michigan does give all the scholarships they can possibly give. So there will have to be some conversations. In fact, we know the Ohio State president just came out. Perhaps he was listening, Steve. Is that possible?
Yes.
Okay. We should send him a shirt. I think that would go right in the garbage. He said, hey, in reflecting on this new thing, he said, we'll still have scholarships, we'll still have programs. And keep in mind, Ohio State has 36 varsity sports, so they have even more than Michigan at 29. Ohio State has 36. He said some of those sports may start to look and act a little bit more like a club sport, but yet compete at the Division I level, et cetera, et cetera. And he said the selling point would be the facilities we offer. And there is already some talk of maneuvering and getting to that, what I call tiers of sports. And I am starting to have some conversations with my friends and people in the athletic department to see if there's been any talk at Michigan around this, so stay tuned.
With schools with big football programs is going to continue to invest in football. And Alabama just paid Michigan's own Courtney Morgan $850,000 to be their general manager. That's $850,000 less for some other sport that doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue.
Yep.
USC, allegedly, I heard this from another podcast, offered Courtney Morgan $1 million a season to join them at USC. So football is where everybody's going to invest, and whatever is left over, they'll try to accommodate the other varsity sports. In a lot of situations, they're probably going to start receiving less unless they have to. So what do I mean by that? If we're going to increase football scholarships from 85 to 105, you're probably going to have 20 more women's scholarships being created as well because of Title IX requirements.
Yeah, that is how it works. And the other little nuance is it is actually supposed to be reflective of your student population. And Michigan actually has a 52 to 53% female student population. So actually it's got to tilt even a little more toward that's another scholarship for women's teams. So we'll see.
Maybe your head coach isn't going to make a whole lot of money.
Yeah, and there's still plenty of things that can change this. Our friend Lou chimed in. He said he does think schools will ultimately have the final call on how many scholarships they want to offer. But Steve, to your point about what could turn all this on its head, he thinks Division I athletes will be employees within 5 years, which was going to change all of this anyway.
All it takes is one judge.
Right.
It turns everything that we've been spending a whole lot of time learning and managing and getting through might be turned on its ear.
Yeah, and it starts with the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, and they've already had favorable rulings with some of these teams. We'll see if it continues, Steve. What else? We got a big week of college football. We're going to see a lot of familiar faces. And lo and behold, Steve, I saw that Coach Prime was back in the news.
Oh, of course.
Has he ever left?
No, he's never left the news.
Yeah.
Coach Prime is not taking questions from Sean Keeler of the Denver Post. Sean Keeler is allowed to attend events, but he will not be allowed to ask questions. I kind of wonder if Sean will just be like Washington media and just shout things out and see if he gets answered or ignored.
Yeah. It doesn't mean he can't ask questions.
Yeah, it depends, I guess, on how the setup is. Pass the mic around and take your turn, or you just go ahead and shout it out anyway for the entire room to hear. But apparently he has taken a number of liberties as a columnist on Deion Sanders.
I got receipts. I know who they are.
And Deion Sanders is about credibility. This is hurting his credibility, and he's decided, we're not taking any more questions from you. I remember on a few occasions that Lloyd Carr would not take questions from certain media members, though that generally lasted a week. This thing from Deion is apparently indefinite. So we'll just see if this is just the story of the day or whether this continues on through the season. And Jim Harbaugh would answer, well, he answered everybody's questions, but for some...
If you gave Jim Harbaugh an out, if you phrased your question as a yes or no question, he took it. Yes. No. But very,
good.
very often.
Bad.
Yeah. You better come with a how do you feel about, you better come with a how or a,
well, even still, sometimes you can get away with that too. And Jim was very creative, but it was with certain people, his answers were pure sugar-free vanilla.
It's deeply appreciated.
They were.
And other times it was just a single word.
It was pretty painful. Steve, we talk about Iowa. I joke, but I feel like if there was a team we talked about other than Michigan, it was, on this podcast, we talked a lot about Iowa. We had an Iowa guy on. And they were
Cade
just
McNamara.
Eric All,
yeah.
And of course then we meet again in the
second time in 3 years.
Yeah, and then they had a very interesting year, the way they wiggled out of the West, and Kirk Ferentz is suspended for the first game. And of course, on my Twitter feed, it was blasting Michigan and Harbaugh. See, that's how a gentleman takes a suspension. He gets it and he takes it. And of course, this was for tampering with Cade McNamara.
We think it was Cade McNamara.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it could have been Eric All. It was one of the players.
It was a player.
Okay.
And Iowa was not very forthcoming about what it was.
Oh, they weren't.
It was a
so they weren't all
not completely. Okay. So it was a self-imposed one-game suspension for not only he and the receivers coach, who happens to know Cade McNamara very well. John Budemeyer.
Let's just put it that way.
He knows Cade McNamara very, very well. If you want to put the two together, feel free.
Okay.
Is it officially that?
Okay, so you're telling me like on a nice June day, they're cruising around Iowa City on a tandem bike, maybe going to an ice cream shop and splitting a cone together. They're getting a bowl of spaghetti and finishing on the last noodle together.
And it happens to be the year that Cade McNamara transferred.
I gotcha.
So Kirk Ferentz says, I made a mistake. I preach being accountable, and therefore I'm taking accountability, and I'm off. That's about it.
Look, but just the suggestion that this makes Ferentz a complete gentleman and Harbaugh a jerk, you're missing a lot of context. First of all, we're talking about multiple instances, and I'm not saying Michigan was a saint in these situations, but they also involved media leaks, NCAA leaks of proposed things that it wasn't this clean, like to the end and where the suspension was. And remember, in the end, Harbaugh did sit out 6 games last year. 6. Right. So anyway.
When the NOA finally shows up, it's going to be a proposed lifetime ban.
Oh, man. Oh. Well, he's going to be under house arrest in Los Angeles for a while.
Hope the Chargers do well over the next few years.
All right. What else, man? We got some big games coming up.
Yeah. USC versus LSU in Las Vegas. That normally would be a conference game, but it is now. Brian Kelly's Bayou Bengals, a 5-point favorite the one thing that I'm going to be looking for in this, Greg, is Miller Moss anywhere near as productive as his bowl game was against Louisville, where he set a school record in touchdown passes thrown and in overall yards. That was sort of his debut in a USC uniform, filling in for Caleb Williams, who opted out of the bowl game, and rightly so. A lot of people think Miller Moss may be the third best quarterback in the Big Ten. We'll see how he does against a legit team that's replacing their own quarterback in LSU. Lincoln Riley, he guided 3 Heisman Trophy winners. That's why I'm interested in Miller Moss. Is he going to eventually be the fourth?
Now, okay, Penn State's got a big one.
Yeah, and speaking of quarterbacks, Drew Aller could not move the offense against Michigan, Ohio State last year. He's in his pivotal third year. And people by default are thinking Drew Allen's the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. And Penn State's expected to make the playoffs. So this is one of the 4 tougher games that Penn State will have this year. It's on the road. Michigan fans should probably root against the Nittany Lions here in this one, but Penn State is favored by 8.5.
Basically, in their last gasp against Michigan, 4th down, they could have punted it. They had 2 timeouts left. Aller went back, got scared by the pressure, and tossed up a ball to no one. And I don't know if it was completely his fault against Michigan. I believe it was the next play that Blake Corum ran and scored a touchdown, effectively putting the game out of reach. And he did not have a great game.
No, but Penn State is hopeful because they hired Kansas's offensive coordinator.
Okay.
And, hey, it's a Big 12. It's an electrifying offense. Therefore, Penn State's offense is going to be great. And I will just tell you, I think the last guy that Penn State fired was also a Big 12 offensive coordinator. So take that for what it's worth.
I will say, Steve, with this expanded conference, you can watch Big Ten football this coming Saturday for, I would say, almost 15, maybe more hours, because there are games all day into the evening. And then Weber State visits Washington at 11 p.m. So it's on. So I don't know when the full Big Ten show is going to be cut. I don't know if they're going to wait till Sunday morning to actually do it, because I feel like they were doing that at night, on Saturday evenings. So I
wonder if they're going to do 90-minute shows, because, man, they go through 14 teams in 60 minutes, and they really blitz their way through. The final drive,
yeah,
which I will watch every weekend.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So look forward to that. What else, Steve?
There's one thing I want to wrap the show up with.
Steve's all excited. Go ahead, man.
It's a new segment called Things I Only Care About.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
Yes. Okay. This is like our 2-minute warning. Someone told me that the 2-minute warning wasn't going to really act like another timeout for the teams.
Right.
Well, it seemed like it was like another timeout for all the teams, full of commercials and the whole thing. But maybe this segment, Steve, is our 2-minute warning.
So,
yeah, go ahead. You want to talk about that?
What they're saying is that in the NFL, there's 4 timeouts per quarter, but a 2-minute warning is like a 5th timeout. So the networks are taking 5 timeouts per quarter. The NCAA is saying, yes, there is a 2-minute warning and there will be a break, but it's still only going to be 4 breaks per quarter.
Okay. I just felt like there were a lot of commercials in some of these games. Okay.
I think I just did things only Greg cares about.
Okay, there you go. I think people care about all the ads because Fox is driving them crazy.
He's already stealing my thunder on the segment I created.
The Fox, yeah, this is things Greg only cares about. I took it over. I've heard, Steve, that Fox is charging in excess of $125,000 per 30-second spot for the Michigan-Texas game. And usually there are about 40 minutes roughly of commercials, meaning if you do the math and they sell all that, that's $10 million in revenue for a 3.5-hour game for Fox. Well done.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Full this afternoon.
All right, Steve, our 2-minute warning. Things only Steve cares about. Da, da, da.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
Why, Greg? In months long of predicting who's going to finish out on top of each individual conference, are people predicting the success of their football teams based on EA25? This is the analysis that I've been reading and seeing from people, that when they think that a team is going to finish first or second in the conference, they're quoting and using as support EA25 for their reasoning. The guy is the best running back in the nation. Why is that? Well, have you seen his spin move on EA25? He's really hard to tackle. I predict great things for the real football team coming up this fall. It's ridiculous.
And it's maddening to you, Steve.
It is.
Okay.
As if the people who made and designed EA25 went forward in time in the time capsule, saw how the teams performed, took their notes back to the developers, and they created the future.
Right.
But this isn't down to 2 or 3 people, Greg. This is a summer-long laundry list of people who write, people who speak, defending their notations on whether a team is going to finish first or last based on how great a player is on a video game.
And his rating that some guy in Utah gave him or wherever they are developed. Okay.
He's a first-team preseason All-American, and by the way, a grade 98. Only 5 people in the history of EA Sports has ever gotten a grade of 98. Therefore, he has to be one of the 5 greatest players ever in the position to play in all time.
Well,
it's maddening.
As a traditionalist and a historian, you would think that I would hate esports, wouldn't you? Like watching people compete esports. I think it's pretty compelling to watch these guys compete against each other in football, in esports. I think it is going to be more of a thing in the future.
I want to thank everybody who made a comment into the show. We mentioned a couple of them on the air today. And so a reminder, everybody, you can hear us on Apple. You can listen to us on Spotify. In some of these venues, you can leave comments. And some of them we will address on a future episode of The Professor and the Pundit. But I'd like to remind everybody, just in case, because it feels so good to say, Greg, Michigan football are your reigning national champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue. Big game Saturday, Steve. We'll see you, man.